May 14th, 1915, 23:30 hours. A heavily guarded dry dock along the River Clyde, Scotland. The Admiralty directive was explicit, stamped in bold crimson ink. All capital ship construction utilizing experimental high-pressure oil-fired boilers is strictly suspended until further notice. The tech was deemed unstable, a catastrophic fire hazard that the British Empire couldn't risk with a world war raging across the Atlantic. Admiral John Jackie Fisher, the erratic and brilliant First Sea Lord, had personally crumpled that order and thrown it into his wastebasket. Standing on the wooden scaffolding overlooking the massive dark hull of what was officially designated as a large light cruiser, Fisher chewed on an unlit cigar. Beside him stood the ship's newly appointed commander, Captain William Bull Halsey. "They call her an economic impossibility, Captain," Fisher muttered, his voice barely carrying over the rhythmic, metallic ring of riveting hammers echoing in the cavernous dock. "The politicians want small, cheap, predictable coal shoveler boats. But this is HMS Courageous."
The ship was a technological contradiction that violated every standard naval doctrine of the era. To bypass the strict parliamentary budget caps and outright bans on new capital ship designs, Fisher had falsified the Admiralty registry. On paper, the ship was listed as a lightly armed scout vessel. In reality, Fisher and a handful of rogue naval architects had secretly wedded the massive, terrifying 15-inch main batteries of a dreadnought battleship to a hull stripped of all heavy armor, designed purely for blistering, unprecedented speed. "She's a glass cannon, Admiral," Captain Halsey said, tracing his fingers along the thin 3-inch steel plating of the hull. "If a German battlecruiser sneezes in our direction, these plates will buckle like tinfoil." "She isn't built to take a hit, Captain. She's built to outrun anything she can't outshoot and obliterate anything she catches," Fisher snapped, his eyes flashing in the dim lanterns of the yard. "The bureaucrats want a standard wall of steel. I am giving you a phantom that redefines naval warfare. The keel is laid, the guns are mounted. If the Admiralty wants to stop us, they'll have to court-martial us on the high seas." Fisher wasn't alone in his defiance. Across the globe, from the smoke-choked shipyards of the Baltic to the hidden naval basins of the Pacific, a shadow network of renegade captains and visionary engineers were actively breaking international treaties, ignoring explicit naval bans, and secretly forging a hidden generation of forbidden warships. They knew the next war wouldn't be won by adherence to bureaucratic paperwork, but by the terrifying, unbanned power of the designs they were hiding right beneath the noses of their own governments. October 12th, 1931, 21:15 hours. The black, freezing waters of the Kiel Canal, Germany. The Treaty of Versailles had stripped the German Navy down to a ghost of its former self, explicitly banning the construction of any submarine vessel. The international inspectors from the League of Nations regularly combed through the blueprints at the Deutschwerk shipyards, ensuring that the Weimar Republic remained functionally toothless beneath the waves. But Captain Karl Donitz didn't believe in treaties. He believed in steel, oil, and the mathematical inevitability of a second global conflict. Standing on the low, rusted deck of a Dutch-designed tugboat, Donitz watched as a massive, unmarked civilian transport barge floated silently through the canal locks. Beneath the heavy canvas tarpaulins of that barge lay the MV-1, a sleek, highly illegal prototype submarine secretly funded by a dummy corporation in the Netherlands and built by rogue German engineers in Finnish shipyards. "If the British or French inspectors board this barge, Captain, we are looking at an international crisis," whispered his executive officer, holding a shielded flashlight over the engineering manifests. "The hull design violates every tonnage limit on the books." "Let them look," Donitz replied coolly, his long coat snapping in the icy Baltic wind. "The inspectors check the shipyards. They do not check the ocean floor. By the time the politicians realize what we have built, we will have a dozen crews trained on the most advanced hull design in the world." The MV-1 was the grandfather of what would become the Type 7 U-boat,
the backbone of the future gray wolves of the Atlantic. It featured a radical, high-capacity battery system and an experimented welded hull rather than traditional rivets, making it lighter, faster, and capable of diving far deeper than anything the Allied navies deemed possible. Donuts climbed down into the cramped, oil-soaked belly of the hidden vessel. The young German sailors inside were working in total silence, wearing civilian clothes to avoid suspicion if raided. They were training on a ghost ship, perfecting the deadly art of undersea pack tactics under the guise of commercial maritime research. Across the world, the story was repeating. While diplomats signed treaties in glittering European capitals, the men who would actually fight the wars were quietly burying the rules in the deep ocean. November 4th, 1936, 0100 hours. Kure Naval Arsenal, Japan. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 had established a strict 10,000-ton limit on heavy cruisers, a desperate attempt by world powers to halt a hyper-expensive naval arms race. The signatures on the parchment were barely dry before Captain Yuzuru Hiraga, Japan's leading naval architect, found the ultimate loophole. Inside the heavily guarded covered dry dock at Kure, the heavy cruiser Mogami was taking shape. To the international inspectors, her blueprints declared her a perfectly legal, treaty-compliant light cruiser sporting 15 6.1-inch guns. But Hiraga and his hand-picked engineering teams had built a terrifying deception directly into the ship's structural bones. "The barbates are too wide for 6.1-inch turrets, Captain," whispered a young lieutenant, looking up at the massive steel rings engineered to hold the main guns. Hiraga smiled grimly, tapping the rolled-up blueprint in his hand. "They are exactly the right size for twin 8-inch heavy battleship-grade artillery. The day war is declared, we pull these light guns off, drop the heavy turrets in, and we instantly possess a capital ship killer that outclasses every treaty cruiser in the American fleet." To keep the ship looking light on the scales, the Japanese engineers had pioneered a radical, dangerous technique. They completely replaced traditional rivets with electric arc welding to save weight. The hull was light, dangerously thin in sections, and packed with an unprecedented amount of engine power and hidden weaponry, including the deadly banned Type 93 Long Lance oxygen torpedoes, which left no telltale wake of bubbles. When the smoke finally cleared from the global conflicts of the 20th century, the archives revealed the truth. The treaties signed by diplomats had merely shifted the battlefield from the high seas to the design drafts. The captains and engineers who built these 14 forbidden designs weren't looking to preserve a fragile peace. They were looking to survive the brutal reality of the next war. They knew that when the cannons began to roar, an extra knot of speed, a hidden bulkhead of welded steel, or a pre-sized gun turret meant the difference between a triumphant return to port and an anonymous grave on the ocean floor. They broke the laws of men to master the unforgiving laws of naval warfare. The legacy of these forbidden warships did not end with the scrapyards or the final torpedo impacts of World War II. The underground arms race of the 1920s and 1930s fundamentally reshaped modern naval doctrine, establishing a dark truth that navies still operate by today. The most lethal weapon is always the one the enemy doesn't know you have until it's too late. The blueprints that rogue captains and visionary engineers risked court-martials to build became the foundational DNA of the modern gray holes that patrol the oceans today. The hidden DNA of modern warfare. The welded revolution, the weight-saving arc welding techniques pioneered secretly by the German Deutschland class and the Japanese Mogami class to cheat treaty scales, are now the absolute standard for every military vessel afloat. Without that stolen innovation, modern high-speed littoral combat ships would be structurally impossible. The modular loophole. Japan's radical rapid swap turret barbettes on the Mogami birthed the concept of modular naval design. Today, navies around the world use containerized weapon systems, CWS, and modular hulls to rapidly convert seemingly harmless cargo vessels or light patrol boats into heavily armed missile platforms within 48 hours.
The submersible carrier. The colossal banned I-400 class underwater aircraft carriers proved that a submarine could be used as a strategic long-range striking platform. That outlawed concept directly evolved into the modern Ohio and Vanguard-class ballistic missile submarines, the ultimate hidden deterrence of the nuclear age. The ultimate victor. When historians look back at the era of the banned warships, one chilling conclusion stands out. The nations that strictly adhered to the legal limits of international treaties often found themselves dangerously outmatched in the opening salvos of conflict. The rule breakers, the renegade captains, and the midnight shipbuilders had already spent decades mastering the volatile technologies that the treaties tried to suppress. In the high-stakes game of global naval supremacy, the ink on a treaty document will always dry, crack, and fade away. But the cold, forbidden steel forged in the dead of night by men who refuse to be bound by paperwork will always hold the final, devastating word on the high seas.